So good afternoon, everybody. And we're going to go ahead and start the sessions here regarding the main event that you guys came here to get some really distinguished speakers to talk about things that you can interact with and provide some relevant context to some of the issues that are affecting cyber. So last July, I was having a meeting with Brian David Johnson, and we were talking about the future threats and some of the exciting things and that are happening in the discipline. And around that time, we found out, wait a minute, the president just announced a policy directive that explains how the cyber incident coordination is going to occur, PPD 41. We've had the layout of the topics that were going to occur. Months before, we had to change things around because this is something that is new and fresh that you need to know about or you have a desire to know about. And so what we did is we brought some individuals who are mentioned by organizational name in the directive and who have responsibility within that to come and talk about their role and responsibility. So with that, I'm very excited to present to you the distinguished panel, and in no particular order of who's better or worse, or who's better and who's bestest. I'm going to introduce our panels and our panel members and a few interesting things about them. So I'm going to start with the interesting fact, and then they're going to go on to talk about themselves. I'm going to start with Dick Schaefer. So let's go right to it. He tells me he's an avid car guy, and he has a 68 Ford?
48 Ford.
48 Ford.
49 Ford.
So he's the Jay Leno on the panel here. But the interesting thing about him, that's not what's interesting, it's that he actually bungee jumped with General Alexander, not once, but twice in 2009. So, Dick, you mind giving a little background about yourself?
Hey, you didn't add that it was in the rain, and it was all Packett's Bridge, the original bungee jumping point in New Zealand.
Were you pushed?
No. It was a 10 on the swan dive scale. Just a bit about me. I grew up in the Marine Corps, went to NSA certainly before all of these cadets were even thought about. In 1975, spent 36 years there. I ended my career as the Information Assurance Director, working for General Alexander, so I ran the defensive side of the business. Retired in 2010, started a small consulting company, working with a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators in cyberspace, in the cyberspace arena. I'm an engineer by training. It's the thing that I love, and I think, as General Alexander aptly said before lunch, it's U.S. innovation that's going to help us make strides against this very challenging problem. And I think we're at a point in our history when the amount of innovation coming out of the community is really at a peak. So it's our job to take that and put it to use.
Now, Dick has a special role up here. We have the government represented with the three ladies. He's representing a position from the private sector. What does PPD 41 mean to the private sector? He has experience with government, but that's his primary role that he has there. So next, we're going to talk with Tanya. Tanya. Now, Tanya is representing the Federal Bureau of Investigation and
Go on.
ODNI. She's the conglomeration of the intelligence community. I'll let you explain that better than I will.
Okay.
So, but one thing about her that you need to know about is she can probably take most of you in this room. She's a brown belt in kickboxing, and she can probably kick over all of your heads. I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, but I can't get my foot above my waist anymore. So
Hi, I'm Tanya Ugoretz. I'm the director of the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, or CTIC, which is the newest of 4 multi-agency intelligence centers under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, or ODNI. Those 4 centers are all focused on national security threats, and CTIC's focus is on foreign cyber threats to U.S. national interests. And our role in PPD 41 is intelligence support. So what that means is working with members of the Unified Coordination Group, as well as the intelligence community and the federal cyber centers, to integrate relevant intelligence and information into a common picture of the threats and incidents that we're responding to. And when we're doing so, ensuring that we're not just looking at the cyber activity in isolation, but we're also looking at activity by the adversary across all domains, so we can start to draw connections and implications for decision makers.
Excellent. So next we have Lucia Cybro, Lucy, and she comes to us from the FBI, and she spent, so as soldiers we deploy and we live in austere conditions, but quite frankly, when I've deployed, I've always been like a little later and wasn't all that austere. We lived in a box or something, some type of Connex with padding and places to sleep and someone cooking hot food for me. Not Lucy. Lucy hiked the John Muir Trail, climbed Mount McKinley, was on that hike for 10 days, watching bears eat your food or play with your food. So as far as mental toughness, grit, which is a sign of a great soldier, I bow to you.
It was Mount Whitney, but
Oh, I said that twice already.
that's okay. It was a long time ago. I'd just finished studying for the bar, and I needed to get away from books and anything related to studying, so nature was the answer. So yes, Lucy Ziobro with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Cyber Division, and I work specifically on operational engagement with private industry. So naturally, the issue of PPD 41 kind of gets run through my section on a real-time basis. In addition to working with private industry, we work jointly with our intelligence community partners to address the needs and concerns of private industry. So within the construct of PPD 41, the FBI has the ticket on threat response. So they're the first responders, the field office agents that have both agents as well as computer scientists. They will come to your industry and start looking at the intrusions or the incident and start collecting evidence, trying to attribute the intrusion to a particular criminal actor or nation state. And by doing so, we collect intelligence that we feed back to CTIC and the rest of the intelligence community to better identify the cyber threats writ large across industry. And also by doing that, over the years of collecting evidence across various intrusions, we've been able to identify and earmark different malware to different criminals to different nation states. So a response could mean you're better, as private industry, better equipped to look at your computer systems and remediate more, which falls into the lane of DHS, whose response under PPD 41 is mitigation and remediation. So although we each have unique responsibilities under PPD 41, we all work together in terms of intelligence collection, remediation, and investigations.
Thank you. And next we have Dr. Phyllis Schneck from DHS. Coming from a family of very musical people, I was very humbled by what she got to do. She got to sing with the group Train in Monte Carlo. And so I want to hear a little bit about that story, but she said her most exciting part of her interesting thing is that she's a great auntie, her primary job.
So thank you, and I can corroborate that. One of your audience members was there for that same corporate trip. So I was in private sector until 3 years ago. That's probably the last thing I did before I came here. And I came into a team of 2,000 of the finest scientists I've ever met in my life. So as we have the role within the Department of Homeland Security, I sit within the National Protection Programs Directorate, and we have the Cyber Ops. So we have the team, the U.S. Computer Emergency Response teams for both the people that keep the lights on and the water running and the control systems, as well as the hardcore IT. And we have the teams that go in and do the cleanup on aisle 9. And as was mentioned by Lucy, our role is asset response. So that's Klingon for saying we come in and do the incident response. We keep you running. So 15 years ago, the going wisdom was unplug it. We don't do that anymore. We're very careful to make sure that we keep a company or an agency, whoever calls us, online. Another big thing to remember that's part of our culture is it's not like Hollywood. None of us walk in rain jackets and take your stuff out the back window. You have to invite us. So I think that's key when you work with the government. And what PPD 41 has helped the government sort of show how our house is in order. So we really do work together. We'll talk a lot about that today. It's been great collaboration since from General Alexander's time when I was in the private sector and now Admiral Rogers. They've said the NSA is the supporting command. So they have helped to declassify information that we use. And again, in that incident response, we come in, we help you keep your system on. We help understand what the bad guy's doing, where they're going. Again, you can understand that by not unplugging it. You can see all this. And then really help you get well, help get the network back up and running, help you keep it well, and then work side by side with our partners in law enforcement. So law enforcement can be our law enforcement that's part of the department, which is maybe the U.S. Secret Service or our Homeland Security investigations, or our brothers and sisters in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they have lead again for the threat response. So think of us as firemen, think of the FBI as policemen, if that makes sense.
So with that, time permitting, we're going to take a few questions at the end of this discussion. We're going to first start with some background information. So since the beginning of his administration, President Obama has emphasized that malicious cyber activity poses a cyber threat both to national security and economic security. With that, the President approved PDD 41, which is the United States Cyber Incident Coordination. This new PPD marks a milestone in codifying the policy that governs the federal government's response to significant cyber incidents. So the first question, I'll turn to our FBI representative. Why now? So what is the importance of having PPD 41? In the past, there were agreements. There was coordination, there was cooperation, maybe not enough, maybe too much, maybe in the wrong direction. There was shared responsibility. But what does PPD 41 address that is different and what remains the same?
So PPD 41, I think, does codify what we've seen in terms of collaboration up until now. But, there are the escalation of attacks that could be considered significant attacks are increasing, and I think they're only going to increase. So our advice, DHS advice, when we deal with the private sector on any cybersecurity matters is to make sure you have an incident response plan in place. Practice it, make sure everybody knows what roles there are, and the government should be no different. And there have, ever since PPD 41 has started, government has gotten together to try and practice this in a fake environment, tabletop exercises, for example, to get better for when a real event occurs. But with the Iranians hitting the financial sector with their distributed denial of service, with the Sony attack, with other attacks to the financial sector, this is occurring. A significant event occurs more and more on a regular basis. So it's important that the private industry knows how to engage with the government, what it looks like, how their intellectual property, their business processes, and their reputation are going to be protected when they do call us, and how we can help them get their systems back up and running, in addition to whatever private security, cybersecurity company that they may hire to bring in. So it's also a way for the White House administration to get easier answers from investigators in terms of cybersecurity to develop policy vis-a-vis nation states. So it's a best practice in terms of just doing business. It is responsive to increasing cyber incidents, and it's a way of being more efficient in government and advising policymakers.
Now, the roles and responsibilities have kind of shifted with that. So, Phyllis, what's your take on why now and the roles and responsibilities shift from PPD 41?
So I'm not sure they've shifted. I think now, you know, as Lucy said, we are seeing just an escalation. It's the speed of computing and the ability to send traffic at the speed of light in bulk because it can be processed that quickly. As I'll repeat earlier, the wise words of General Alexander when he said that private sector innovation will drive this, but it's also driven it for the adversary. So to get ahead of an adversary that doesn't have laws, and frankly lawyers, no offense, they're great people, but they have no stumbling blocks, they have a ton of money, and they're eating our lunch. And so to get that agility back, we have to do it in ways that are, first of all, lawful, but have this response plan in practice, understand exactly those tiny little things of who does what get really big in the rush of an incident response, especially a big one. And we are all friends. We're on the phone. My people are on the phone with Lucy's people, with everybody's people at 4 in the morning because the adversary, their time zones may not be at our convenience. This stuff is going on 24/7. So the why now is soonest, right? And once the government has said these are the roles and we get it and we know our lanes even better than we did before, the private sector is now working with us to create the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. So the private sector, corporate people that represent each sector, whether it's electric or financial or services or water, are working with the government to create this plan so that they can use what we do in PPD 41 and the work of the intelligence community in a way that they see best.
Thank you. And now to you, Tanya, from the intelligence community. We all have different roles and responsibilities from Title 10, Title 15, Title 18, Title 30, it just goes on and on and on. Why now, and what has changed for you?
Well, I think the cyber community is at a point of maturation that maybe it wasn't in prior years, where something like an integrated intelligence center like CTIC is timely. And also, I think what you've heard the administration say is that there are many lessons that we can apply as a whole from our experience post 9/11 with counterterrorism in terms of unity of effort, in terms of integration of information. And I think you saw that happen a few years ago at the policy level. And now I think that type of integration and unity of effort is extending across the federal cyber community, and then by extension with the private sector as well.
Does it mean anything to you, Dick, from the private sector? I mean, how?
So here's where I think I want to split the private sector into a couple of different segments. First, I'd say what PPD 41 did was codify what I think were best practices that were implemented across a whole series of organizations that leveraged each other's strength in times when we were all called upon to do something. And I think it works really well for the tier ones. So I'm talking about the big companies, the big banks, the big energy companies. Where I think there's maybe a greater divide is from the tier twos down. There are a lot of community banks that work together to provide a whole series of resources for communities, cities, municipalities. They're not the Goldman Sachs. They're the Carlos Vega, local bank.
There's no money in that bank, just so you know.
They're tied to the big banks. And so if you think of sort of the supply chain and the interactions between and among these institutions, same thing is true of energy providers. And it's going to be even more so as we think about renewables in terms of wind and solar. You can see solar farms popping up all over the country. Most of those are not owned by the big mega companies, they're owned by smaller institutions. And so I think while the tier ones know how to reach out, the question is, who do I call, when do I call them, and what should my expectations be when I do make that call? And I think the tier ones know that. They can call DHS, they can call FBI. It's a little new for them to be calling DNI, but really FBI and DHS you know, those are pretty well-established channels of communication. I used to get multiple calls a week, and I would just call, Sean Henry was my point person at FBI, and together Mark Weatherford and a whole group of people that as we move chairs, we know how to deal with things. So we've codified that, and it works well in the tier ones. I don't think the tier twos or those below have that same level of knowledge and understanding, and yet I think everything that we've seen heretofore is practice. I think we're being tested. I think we're being evaluated in terms of our response and our response time. And those tier twos and tier threes will be involved in any major conflict, whether it's from a nation state, whether it's from a transnational, or whether it's from a highly resourced set of dissidents who can create some pretty significant havoc in this nation. And so I think from the private sector standpoint, we really need to think about maybe two major segments, the tier ones and then those below. We're reaching the tier ones. I'm not sure we're getting as much traction below that level.
So if I was to summarize the response here, I would say that we're saying that there was a maturation of the discipline, the domain, and the community, that now we're ready to codify this process and share those best business practices so they're not lessons learned or that get lost at some of those other entities that can benefit from the experience, positive or negative, from what others have done. Is that?
Yeah, I think PPD 41 actually did codify the best practices. It's now, how do you take that and really turn it into a real ops plan, so that if I'm an entity in the private sector, you know, again, I only care about three things. Who do I call? When do I call them? And what should my expectations be once I call them? And I have a business to run. You know, if I happen to be a small firm on the NASDAQ with a trading floor, or I'm on the trading floor, I can't stand a couple hours of downtime. So, you know, what do I do?
Before I go on, anything else want to add to that?
Well, I will say, PPD 41 does in fact take a risk-based approach. So when you're looking at the impact that an intrusion will have on the financial sector, you're going to want to make sure that the response to the largest banks, not the tier 2 banks, are where you're going to have your resources hit first, because that's where the major economy impact is going to take place. So the answer is yes. But the other answer is, just like with any crime, you're going to call law enforcement. If you think a crime has occurred, you're going to call law enforcement. And then law enforcement, in turn, brings in PPD 41 and call to once, call to all, regardless. So if a tier 2 company believes that they have been hit, they should call the FBI. The FBI will respond. And if it's malware that is linked back to a nation state, we're going to take it as probably a significant event and call DHS and start the process going. So by virtue of resources, PPD 41 does take into account the risk-based approach and put resources towards the higher impact entities, but on the flip side, there is a way for the tier 2s to engage.
So that leads me to the second question here. It's going to be for you, Phyllis. You can jump in however you want to on this one here. So when does somebody call? What is the difference between a significant, acute, and a steady state, persistent threat, something chronic? There's a lot of buzzwords that are used in PPD 41. There's shared responsibility, risk-based response, just like Lucy mentioned, respecting affected entities, that's the protection of the entities, the unity of effort, enabling restoration and recovery. What, if you were to focus on one of those things, that this audience of practitioners, leaders, experts, what would you say you would highlight?
So I'd highlight the fact that the worst
What keeps us up at night is the cyber event that causes a physical consequence. I got a background in high performance computing. I love computers, I love circuits. They don't matter. People matter. Our infrastructure matters, our water, our gas, our electric. So what we look at is, how do you prioritize what the impact is? So one of the things another executive order, 13636 called, was a list, section 9 of that executive order lists companies for whom a cyber event could cause catastrophic consequences. That was sort of the first step in prioritizing those. We call them section 9 companies. And that list is constantly being augmented and changed, as you can imagine. And again, it says nothing about their cyber posture. It says if they had a significant cyber event, we could have loss of life. So that's one place that's already been prioritized. I want to add another piece to this, with tier 2s, I call them small to medium business overall, not just the banks. This is 99% of our business infrastructure. And the fact that they don't have the resources for even good cybersecurity or even okay, mediocre cybersecurity in most cases is dangerous, not just for them, it's dangerous for the community because we're not seeing what's hanging out there. We're not seeing even the chronic quiet threat. They are a wonderful jump-off ground from a scientific perspective onto anything else. Companies that may connect to them, companies that may buy them, companies that may buy from them. So it's an enormous risk. So the priority question from a science perspective, a policy perspective, I think is still being, it's not fully answered in PPD 41. It's sort of good thinking to say the bigger ones first, and usually we do that because it makes sense. But there's a lot to be said for these small to medium businesses that are harboring a huge amount of threat that we're not seeing. A large piece of our situational awareness is just dark. So we're looking at, and I know in my group, we're looking at how we reach out to them for more services so that we can use the power of government to take the great things built by the private sector, to take the intelligence that Admiral Rogers' team is declassifying for us so that we can push it out more quickly, and to take information that we see at DHS by protecting many parts of the federal civilian government, and we could put that all together and get that piece of situational awareness. When it comes to calling, I used to run an organization for a public-private partnership, grew it from 2,000 to 33,000 some. It was with this, anchored by the FBI, it was called InfraGard, and the biggest lesson I took from that was call someone. Have your relationships set in advance. Please don't call 1-800-CYBER when something's hitting you, and call someone. Some people don't like to call law enforcement. So we ask that they just call somebody, even a private sector, call your private sector company, a cyber provider, someone that can help you through a trusted relationship get to one of our organizations. People call us all the time. We come and do the incident response, sort of the reverse, and then we bring in the law enforcement, but we do it with the customer, right? I come from private sector, so I call them customers. I didn't know what a stakeholder was when I came in. But to me, it's about service. How do we build the trust? Because there are two things that have to happen here. One is we have to clean up the adversary, but we also have to make sure that you don't suffer reputation loss, business loss, money loss. This is the life I knew before I lived in that house. And that's very, very important to us. But on the other side, you got to get the guy and put him in an orange jumpsuit. So we can't do this without the private sector. We can't do it without incident response and trust. And we certainly can't do it without law enforcement. And I don't think that the directive puts all of that together yet. It gives us a good start as to what are the lanes in the road for governments who know what we're doing. But that incident response plan leaves the door open, as it was designed to do for private sector, to tell us how they want that done.
Part of that challenge is the information or intelligence exchange. And so when you have this shared responsibility, it goes both ways. So I'm going to turn this to Tanya now. How are you interacting with the sharing of information, the shared responsibility as far as the intelligence that you're collecting from something happening over here that may affect industry over here?
Sure. So I'd like to break that down into a few different pieces. So as I mentioned, CTIC's intelligence support role, part of that is ensuring that we as a federal government have a consolidated picture at any given point about cyber threat or an ongoing incident. Basically, a snapshot of what we know at any given point in time of who is doing what to whom and why, and what we're collectively doing in response. And that baseline serves as kind of a starting point for decision making. So first is how we define what that shared situational awareness means. And I think that's important because situational awareness can mean different things to different people. For some, it can just be a matter of just making sure that the right people see the information that they need to in a timely way. For us, we take it a step further, and it's not just about that movement of information and helping that happen, but also ensuring that people understand why certain information is being highlighted at a given point in time and what the context is for understanding it. In my background as an intelligence analyst and as a briefer, the best analysis and intelligence isn't worth anything if you can't explain why it's important to the decision maker and how it fits into the overall picture. So that when we're trying to build that consolidated picture of threat or response to an incident, we're really looking for that context, not only of what has happened, but how it informs us and how it fits into the bigger picture. The second piece is how we convey that information. So I think we all know the challenge we have in cyber, where increasingly, because of the scope and scale of the threats and incidents we face, there is a much broader community who needs to be conversant and understanding of those threats, ideally before they happen. And so part of our role at CTIC is to try to build that bridge and to make cyber threat information accessible not only to those who spend day in and day out focused on cyber threat issues, but those who don't but need to be aware of it and understand it in order to be able to factor it into their own decision making. So we can't afford for technical jargon to be a barrier to understanding, and so our analysts put a fair amount of time into translating what they read into that more accessible context that really helps to build understanding. And again, it's all with the intent of informing decision making. So the last piece then is who we get the information from. And here I think it's important to stress what CTIC is and is not. We are very much an ODNI intelligence center. We are focused on our integration role within the federal government. So you can think of us as behind the scenes, working with our federal partners to integrate information from the network defense, law enforcement, and intelligence communities. But we do not have a direct interface or interaction with the private sector, with state and local law enforcement, or with foreign governments. And we were purposely scoped that way because there are already existing agencies like DHS and FBI who have spent years building strong relationships with the private sector and with state and local law enforcement. So it didn't make sense to create another entity that was going to add confusion to that. So information from the private sector comes to us through DHS and FBI and DoD through their existing relationships and would flow back the same way.
So this was going to be a question directed to you as the primary, but I'm going to go to this now and then follow up with Dick for a response. With the experience at NSA now in private sector, your take on this. So this is for you, Tanya. The role of ODNI is to facilitate the building of situational threat awareness and sharing of related intelligence. So situational threat awareness and sharing of intelligence awareness. What does that actually mean? You don't interface directly with the private sector. Mm-hmm. So how does someone like Dick or someone like the members of the audience here, how are they getting situational awareness?
Well, from the private sector standpoint, probably DHS especially and FBI could speak more directly to that. So as I mentioned, CTIC was scoped the way it was to respect the existing roles and relationships that DHS, FBI, and DoD have. So we do have a strong information sharing role, but that role is to support our federal partners, and that includes supporting them with information they need to share with their partners outside of government. So Phyllis mentioned earlier Admiral Rogers and NSA's efforts to downgrade information that DHS is able to share, and indicators and information like that. So we too are building our relationships with FBI and DHS, identifying the means they currently use to share information, identifying needs they have in terms of the types of intelligence and information they would like to be able to share. And then we kind of work again behind the scenes as an advocate and as a facilitator. We're very much a customer support organization, so that we help to clear obstacles and work with the originators of information to get them what they need in order to be able to share.
So from interfacing with some of the tier 1 organizations, they have a direct line, like you said. You can call Sean Henry in his former position and some of the seniors, but not everybody has that access. So this is to you, Lucy, and then following to Phyllis. I'm going to go back to you. If it's enough, Dick, for you, it's how are you actually sharing that situational awareness where it's meaningful, actionable to the private sector, other than just saying there's a threat out there, but does it really apply to me?
FBI has so many programs where we engage with the private sector. I mean, that's really the whole purpose of my section. So, you can start at the individual level. So InfraGard is a program that the FBI supports, and if you become a member of InfraGard, you get access to our private industry notifications with regards to cyber attacks, public service announcements with cyber attacks, and also our alert systems where we list the IP addresses and malwares associated with cyber attacks. And again, those products come as a result of our investigations or working jointly with DHS. We oftentimes put joint action, joint bulletins out as well. So you have InfraGard at the individual level. If you're a Fortune 500 company, there's the Domestic Security Alliance Council, where your company is part of this group where the executives, either the chief security officers or the CEOs, come to the FBI. They spend time at our academy and get briefings across the board as far as criminal threats, terrorism threats, cyber threats. So you have that engagement. And then we've also instituted a CISO Academy, where likewise we've brought information security officers from different companies in to our training academy at Quantico and focus strictly on cyber matters. Similarly, we've had general counsel summits. Very often, when you deal with a company, you always have to deal with their legal. Does the company want to deal with law enforcement? How does it affect their shareholders? All of those issues typically have to go through general counsel. So we have these summits to educate them on the benefits of working with law enforcement, kind of telling them what happens when we do show up, if there's a cyber incident. So again, there's these layers of instituted programs. We have the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, where likewise it's a nonprofit. The FBI sits offsite with private industry and they analyze threats coming in. They try to mitigate them. My section, I'm on the speaking engagement all the time. If product liability attorneys, there's always a group out there that somebody from my staff is out there talking about cyber threats, talking about PPD 41, how to engage. So in terms of getting with the private sector, the FBI has multiple programs from an individual all the way up to a corporation where we try to convey cyber threat messages to.
So you were doing that before PPD 41, all those programs there in place. So to Phyllis, what's different today with PPD 41 as shared situational awareness?
So I would say it's codified, as Lucy said before. There are some things that are newer that have evolved over the past 2 years. I'll state that I came into the department having learned a lot in the private sector from the FBI. So I had the privilege to run InfraGard for 8 years and NCFTA for 3 or 4. Both are examples of private sector engaging with law enforcement, with government, and together. Right? NCFTA is a great example. It was an FBI program, but it had DHS in there. It had all kinds of letters of agencies, but it also had some really smart people that were putting information together using the trust of private sector. So I was sort of schooled in that. I'll pick on a very, very dear friend because his name was mentioned earlier, but Sean Henry taught us all a lot about how a lot of this works. So as Lucy mentioned, the legal side, lawyers are going to drive this forward because our ability in government is unique. We can take information that we all have together. We're doing this now, we were doing it before PB 41, and we'll do it on steroids forward. But that's a unique ability that we have in coordination and collaboration to give to the private sector. But companies have to want to and be willing to consume it and hopefully share something back. The adversary has no barrier to sharing. So there is a very storied event, we talked about it on the Hill, where I was with a company and we had some information that I had not given to Sean. He was a dear friend, we'd gone for coffee. And when it went public, he called me up and said, humorously, he called me on my landline and people said, oh, did he get that? No, I gave it to him. He was actually a friend. But he said, why didn't you give me this? It was a week ago, we had coffee. And I said, our lawyers wouldn't let me. And that was an example of having to choose between company and country. And no one should ever have to do that. So I think going forward, what this helps us do is, as a whole of government, first of all, know how, again, refine the lanes on the road so we can work faster, but explain the lanes on the road in non-Klingon, to Tanya's point, communicate it to what we're going to do, and then bring in the private sector. So at DHS, we do this with people and machines. We do the pretty PDFs and the joint information bulletins that we like to call the jibs on the floor that we do with the FBI and others to say this is what's happening, this is Jupiter hacked Saturn, this is the details we have, and push it out to our partners. We have something called the traffic light protocol. Only government can come up with these crazy things, but it's different colors. Red is very limited, white is not, and there's a spectrum of yellow, amber, green, etc. On the machine side, I think this is what is so innovative. We have just certified our operations center, the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, the NCIC, because you could never confuse that with the CTIC. A lot of time be conflicting that in the private sector. This is a watch floor, 50 people on the floor, dark, big screens. We actually use the data, 700-person operation across 3 states. This is 24/7, works very closely with another FBI Ops Center, the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. They're more on the cyber crime and nation state, call me out if I get this wrong, and we're on the incident response, private sector, collect the data. And we just certified our Ops Center with the help of the Hill to be the center for what I'll call automated indicator sharing. And the non-Klingon version of that means, going back to my own roots, using the speed of machines that the adversary has been using against us for us. And understanding that the way computer intrusion works is all I have to do is get my instruction to be the next one in your computer's memory, and I gotcha. Because then the computer, it's not smart, it's just fast. It will execute my instruction, and I'll tell it what to do for the rest of its life. I gotcha. So what we have to do is do what your body does, an immune system, biologically, with computer information. We have to, when you get a cold, your body doesn't have a conference call to fight the cold. It recognizes that this is really bad and I want it out. The way we do that with our computer systems is hopefully get the right information, and we call it indicators, not personally identifiable or private information, but indicators such as this IP address is bad, or this scrambled up version of a file is bad, or we've seen trouble with this. Push that information to machines as quickly as possible. So that is up and running. We're working with the FBI, with the intelligence community, and that took about 3 or 4 months to get set up. I tell people it took that long for one reason. It shouldn't take that long just to set up a server to collect information and spit it out. Those of you technical in the room know that a monkey could do that in 2 hours. What took us so long was to get it right, to work with the FBI, with the intelligence community, with all the equities to understand what information, because it's going to be at machine speed. So whatever we tell it to do is going to happen very fast and going to happen repetitively. You've got to get it right. So understanding the difference between what information can be shared and what can't and where it should go was a very complex problem. So that is up and running. The next phase is to make sure that the right pictures, I call it the cyber weather map, that the right information, the right humidity, wind speed, air pressure data is put together to start looking at how storms form across the internet. So we're not there yet. This is just starting, but we do have the ability, and it is working, to have machine data distributed to other machines. And this is the very beginning of the next phase of making the internet more intelligent. And those are sort of buzzwords. But what it really means is giving a machine a fighting chance of knowing that what it's about to do is bad.
So the discussion of self-healing, self-patching, that's a whole other topic there. And we're getting there, but that's also kind of the fundamental of the Cyber Grant Challenge that DARPA's working on. And how do we fix the system, or the system give the ability to fix itself? So what probably many of you are thinking is, we're not there yet, and probably some skepticism on that. And to pull on that thread just a little bit, Dick, this one's to you here. You're representing the community out here. What's there's a lot of buzzwords, a lot of things that we're doing, or say we're doing, or we're gonna do. What's the pushback?
You know, I think from an industry perspective, the question always is, well, what's the value proposition, and how does it change my situation? From, does it add reputational risk? Does it, so really, how is the government going to add value to me? Quite frankly, what Phyllis just described is something that we in the community, and you know, I go back to my 40 years of history in this, is something that has always been the Holy Grail. We didn't have the technology before. We have the technology today. Quite frankly, it is easy. It's only a couple of lines of code. So, you know, we can set a very fine-grained policy for an enterprise. We can tell what the machines can do and what they can't do. We know how to manage that. We know how to set that. If it gets the right stimulus information from central locations that say, this is coming your way, you ought to block these ports, or you ought to take this action, or technology today allows us to do that. What we really need to do is help educate the system owners that this is of value to them, and they need to embrace it, as opposed to, and embrace can be a small E today, can be a larger E next year, 3 years from now. Those tier 2 enterprises do not have the resources. Again, Phyllis said, most of these folks do not have their own IT staff. Most of them don't have a CIO, let alone a CISO. They're relying on outsourced capabilities. And so it's a combination of a system owner knowing what to ask for, and how to write a service level agreement, and what should be in it, and what sort of services they should get from their providers. And then the one organization that hasn't, or the one, I'll say, field that hasn't been mentioned here today, I think the insurance companies have a big role in the rate of adoption within the tier 2 and below. I think the tier 1s are almost government. They talk a different language, but their bureaucracies, their processes, their procedures, they have as many lawyers as the government does. But we know how to communicate pretty well. I give the ISACs a tremendous amount of credit. I don't think we say enough about sort of the progress that's been made in that arena, because we've all been, those of us who have come from the community just take that as a given. It's the next layer down. And those are the ones where, if I'm an adversary, it's sort of like in wartime, I'm going to stash my weapons in the basement of the church. I'm going to stash my weapons in the basement of the school. I'm going to stash my weapons in the basement of houses of sympathetic people. And when I need to use them, I'm going to all those places, and I'm going to unleash my operation. The adversary is doing the same thing today. I have absolutely no doubt that buried deep inside the system of mom and pop operations all around the country, literally all around the world, we have things staged so that when someone wants to do, whether it's a denial of service, whether it's an attack against an energy system, a banking system, and we think about denial of service, but there are much more dramatic ways of wreaking havoc. I think those things are pre-placed. And so it's through interaction with the tier 2s, interaction with organizations like DHS, organizations like the service providers that are providing those capabilities, You can go to the big three, IBM, HPE, and Trustwave, and you can reach literally thousands of small businesses, of mid-tier businesses, and that's the way they're going to come along. But they're going to have to see a value proposition. They're going to have to give them something that they find tangible, so that they will open up and be accepting of policies, procedures, processes that we might all call best practices, that we want them to employ, so that they make that enterprise more defendable and literally become a stronger link in the chain than what they are today.
So to be fair to the audience here, this skepticism is what I'm trying to draw out from the private sector. We have, in our culture, from the beginning, a distrust of government. I will trust private sector more than I will trust the entities, and I'm part of that structure. With my email, Gmail, before I'll use some of these other structures that are out there. So what's the incentive to you to want to cooperate with this process?
So leverage those relationships. If I don't trust sort of big government, but I trust my service provider, okay, work that angle. And trust is a function of value. Again, if I think I'm going to get something that's useful to me, if I think whether that's protection or responsiveness when I have a problem, then I'm more than likely to engage in a conversation that hopefully, at the conclusion of which, I'm better informed. And if I'm better informed, I can make better decisions. And part of that is the government wants me to share things with them. The government is much, much better today in sharing things back with the private sector. In some cases, it's a matter of just knowing where to go. InfraGard has been around for a long time, but I bet you can go, if you did a survey of tier 2 businesses, let me say businesses with less than 20 employees, less than 50 employees, and you mentioned, are you a member of InfraGard, you'd get a glazed stare. And yet, it's been around, it's penetrated deep into the business community. This is, I go back to Solar Sunrise. Solar Sunrise was the first live fire exercise that we faced in the U.S. government. I was in the Pentagon at the time. I sat at the table when John Hamre looked at Sue Campbell and I and said, who's in charge? And that was two 16-year-old kids from Cloverdale, California, that brought the Department of Defense to its knees for 6 weeks. Because we didn't know whether Saddam Hussein was launching something at us or what. And so that was 1998, so that was 18 years ago. So you figure how far we've come in 18 years. I think a huge way. The government has come that far. The private sector, in terms of the tier 1s, have come that far. We've got to bring the rest of the community along with us, because they are an integral part of both the defense that the nation has to have, and of course they sit on the side of the vulnerability as well, because they could just as likely be the attack vector that is the crucial piece in the puzzle.
You guys want to add to that before we go on to the next round of questions here?
I just say that the problem is also with the culture. People will share a lot of information with social media and all kinds of private sector establishments and grocery store cards that collect all your information, but they don't think about what is the value they could get back from sharing with government. So I think this is a conversation. The example I used in public is I will give all my information to DHS to get that TSA pre-check, because it makes security at the airport 4.5 minutes. That's worth it to me. You've hit my pain point. You got me. I will not do it to get 15 cents off a watermelon. So the idea, though, is to educate the public and educate these businesses, and I think that Dick is exactly right.
No, that's a true statement there. I mean, to get a better rate for something, I won't do anything. I'm not going to give them any of my information. But if I can level up on my Pokemon, you can have my Pokemon, my social security number, because that takes time and effort. So I get that. There's a general, I wouldn't say distrust, but there's a protection of my intellectual property or my business that I'm not incentivized to work with you. But in the DOD and the Army, I'll give an example. I'm an Army aviator, and I've investigated accidents. There are whenever there's a catastrophic incident, there are two investigations that occur in parallel. One of them is a collateral investigation, and what it does is it is designed to find fault. Who's going to get the responsibility pinned on them that this is the reason, and we're going after you, and we're going to end your command, end your career, and whatever it takes. We want to blame somebody, pin the rose. The other is a safety investigation. The safety investigation is not concerned with punitive damage. It's concerned with preventing this from happening again. One of them gives you immunity. The safety investigation, none of it can be used against you. The other investigation, all of it can be used against you. Who do you think I'm more apt to talk to? So, in that, with that model, this is to you fellas here, what are you doing? What is DHS doing to protect the interests of the private sector when something does occur?
That's a great question, and I don't think we're done yet. So there are two things. One has been around for a long time, Protected Critical Infrastructure Information, or PCII. And that's a program where if you, private sector, share information with the Department of Homeland Security, your regulators cannot go after you. We keep it confidential. Your entity is given a number internally. We're all trained on how to handle that. And even when I first got here, my team briefed up upper leadership on this, and I was actually the secretary, and we said company number X, and he said, why don't I know the name? True story. And we said, well, this is under PCII, sir. He said, I'm the secretary. So we trained the secretary on PCII. But we keep it locked down, and we do that to build the trust. Once you break the trust, you don't get it back. Trust is earned, and trust will be the currency forward for cybersecurity. Every time you share with us or the FBI, you're protecting the community. You're not only protecting yourself, because we will. A call to one is a call to all, and we will and do work together. This is cell phone, first name, nickname basis. We all have people in each other's operation centers doing this 24/7. It's happening right now. And I've been in the meetings where we didn't know something and we called up and they got it, and then they asked, do you have everything you need? And we asked, do you have everything you need? And sometimes messages crossed, or field offices don't tell another field office, and they make a phone call, or we make a phone call, and it happens. I can promise you, being right in it, it happens. But we keep, when you share that as private sector with us, we keep that incident confidential for you. But it helps us to know what happened, because when it happens to another company, just like I think an airline safety investigation, although I've never done one, is that we can say, these parts look very similar. We need to watch this when we do the investigation without divulging the name. So that helps us learn more, to help you and the others in the community, and this goes to those small and mediums that many of them don't know there is cybersecurity likely, to help protect them as well. And the second piece is we do have, with the help of the Cyber Information Security Act with the Hill, we do offer targeted liability protection. So those companies that will share information with us in the name of protecting cybersecurity do get that liability protection. And that's very different. But back in the day when I was talking to Sean Henry, and our lawyer very wisely said, whoa, our researchers discovered this and it's very important, but we can't share it yet because we could be liable if somebody uses this against us. That has gone and made a lot of progress to solve that. But I will say, and I'd ask my colleagues here, we have a long, long way to go. If you look at the average company, whatever size, they will stop and think before they report anything. And that's not a pause that the adversary will ever take.
I'm going to turn to the FBI on that same question. What are you doing to safeguard the interest of the private sector? Because you're right, I'm not going to call you if I'm afraid that what you find might be something that I did or didn't do right, or apparently in somebody's eye, you get a vote in that.
So when we deal with some of the regulating agencies, they whether or not you're going to get hit as a private corporation with a fine for not protecting personally identifiable information enough because your cyber systems got hacked. They view cooperation with law enforcement as a mitigating factor, and they actually take that into account when they make their decisions if there's going to be any fines. So, you know, we know by working with them that they want private companies to cooperate with the FBI because they understand that, you know, especially when you have a nation-state actor, it's something that really needs to be properly attributed because it goes much higher than your particular company. And more often than not, you're not the only company that is getting hit. So it's imperative that private corporations report this to the government to further identify the breadth of the attacks across industry and across sectors. If we get to the point where a prosecution is imminent, within DOJ and U.S. Attorney's offices, the indictment, for example, would not refer to your company in true name. It would be business company 1 or business company 2. If your intellectual property or your trade secrets get stolen, if it gets to court, that's not going to actually be the nuts and bolts of what your property isn't going to be put on as evidence. It's going to be discussed in private chambers with the court. So there are, within the prosecutive process and also the investigative process, there are embedded means to protect you from the regulators in terms of, you know, trying to get hit with fines. But the other part is we look at private industry when they get hit, we treat them as a victim, okay? When Sony got hit, we put in an FBI agent embedded in Sony Corporation for about 2 months, helping the company get, you know, looking closely at the forensic file, trying to figure out who these guardians of peace were before we were able to attribute it to North Korea. So it wasn't a shaming, it wasn't, you know, at this point, because it was a movie, high publicity, it was already out in the media. In other instances, it may not get to the media, and part of PPD 41, one of the guiding principles is to respect the industry. It's to work with the industry and make sure that their equities, their reputation is respected. So again, our opinion is from an investigative standpoint, threat assessment, we're treating you like a victim. We're telling the regulators that you are cooperating with us so that they can affect whether or not, you know, their decision is to fine you. And then if it gets to the prosecutive stage, the prosecutors have very set criteria to protect your intellectual property, your trade secrets, and your reputation when it comes to the indictment.
Anybody else want to add to that? Okay, 'cause I have a couple more here. So you brought up Sony, but I'm not going to bring up any active investigation. So anything we come up with was reported in the press or hypothetical. So Tanya, how does your organization share it with the private sector to ensure that the organization is able to protect, respond, restore operations after an incident, or flip that around? Incident response assumes post-incident. What are you doing in advance, as outlined by PPD 41, in the prevention aspect of it? What's your role and responsibility at ODNI?
So I think PPD 41, as you mentioned, is about incident response. So it does not really address so much prevention of cyber incidents, but how we would have a coordinated unity of effort in response in terms of threat and asset response and intelligence support to those functions. As far as preparedness and prevention, you know, what we do day to day in the intelligence community and across the federal cyber community and with our other federal cyber centers is essentially, you know, triaging the volume of cyber threat reporting that we receive on a very steady basis, and try to answer the question of what matters. So early in my career, I was the daily intel briefer to FBI Director Mueller, and this was soon after 9/11. and maybe the following year, and he was still receiving kind of the daily compendium in the threat matrix of all the people who were trying to kill us that day. And it would just be item after item of threat after threat, and finally he would just look at me with his head in his hands and say, which of these do I actually have to worry about? And that was my role to answer, to kind of weed through all the noise and surface from that, which of those he actually had to worry about. So that's what we try to do in the intelligence community on a daily basis, is do that sorting function so you don't have to. And we do that by working very closely with the other federal cyber centers, NCIC and CIGTF, as were mentioned, as well as others, to add context to what we're seeing every day and try to trace the arc of what is happening. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important that we don't do that just by looking at that cyber activity, but we have a good understanding of the motivations, the intentions, the capabilities of our primary adversaries. And so we work with partners through all that, and that's a means of being prepared. And I think when we receive the question sometimes of what difference would it have made if you had existed at the time of Sony or at the time of OPM. And I would never be so bold as to say there would have been prevention necessarily, but at a minimum, what we think we can help with is more timely recognition of what is happening by working with the variety of partners that we do, by trying to bring disparate strands of information together and to try to give that fuller picture of the activity we're seeing.
So we often use analogies to describe something to help us get a better picture of how we do things. And incident response, the analogy that I use is how a group will come together for the response. And you have two choices, and a lot in between, but two extreme choices. You can do it as a pickup game with whoever shows up, whoever's willing to be there, and you have the talent that shows up on the playground that day. And then you have the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is a culmination of an entire career of practicing 100 plays that are going to occur that you've rehearsed over a season, over multiple seasons, that you get to the Super Bowl. An incident to some of these organizations is their Super Bowl. So if that's the case, the outreach or the reaching out, I would say part of that team sport of cyber response, the outreach is a contact sport. You have to reach out and touch somebody. One of the aspects of the Sony incident that was reported is that someone senior in Sony knew somebody in the FBI, and that is what really initiated the conversation or initiated the response. What are you doing here to coordinate the response among yourselves so that the response is actually coordinated, where you're having these conversations, your outreach effort is synchronized? So I'll start with you.
There are things going on right now, again, ongoing investigations that we can talk about, where it's not just in practice, it's real life. So it's happening. Like Phil said, people know each other by name. There are calls daily, working with Tanya's folks in terms of figuring out what should be the next big thing that we should bring and advise the private sector with. So it's happening. In addition to that, there are tabletop exercises that different sector-specific agencies put on, the ISACs put on. So we engage with with our partners on a regular basis. We do know each other by first name, in addition to just the daily activities, the investigative activities. There's new, for example, policies that are always coming down from the White House that require our input to make cyber security better. So we're in constant contact with each other. It is the personal relationships that make a difficult situation go smoothly and well. So it's happening on a daily basis.
Anything to add, ladies?
So when there is a significant cyber event, we set up what they call a unified coordination group. So we have each of the different agencies represented, and you can also, in the private sector, has roles in these things as well, as far as what we can learn. And also point out, it hasn't been raised today, but cyber is not just, it's a global problem, because we're all connected. So we do, our emergency response team, our US CERT communicates with about 300 different CERTs globally. And I think what you'll find is, as I'm a nerd, so I'm familiar with this sort of culture, but techies will always talk to techies. Techies don't have this barrier to overcome of trust. They just get it because they all speak Klingon and write code. And so it's very easy to get that information shared. It's much easier than it is, I think, at sort of the upper levels. So we've worked that out, and then I think our process is much smoother, just from what I've seen over the past few years. People are working, just so people outside of the scene know, people are working very, very diligently on making this happen. Just like in the aviation industry, every event's a learning experience. Everybody from any other agency wants to help. To Lucy's point, these are our victims. When something happens to you, you're a victim. We'll do everything we can as a whole of government to keep you running, to not let this be a catastrophe for you or your business or your brand or your name, but to make sure that we learn something from it, because it is happening elsewhere. This is like roaches. There's never one. And what we've told as a department, we've told in the small to medium community for the utility side, if you're an owner and operator of a small utility, electric or water, you have malware. It's the common cold. And you likely have this black energy malware that we did a whole campaign to educate on this. It's been all over the press. If you run one of these open source tools, the adversary has this, the adversary does this. You can do it in your basement. If you run a tool that shows you everything that's connected to the internet, you'll find a nice portion of those sort of tier 2 on the energy companies facing the internet. That's not a wise decision. It's not illegal, but it isn't smart. But they don't know better. So we have a lot of work to do in educating people and reaching out to people and making it harder for this adversary. But I will say, just having been in government for 3 years at this point, huge strides have been made. And we all do, I think, work very hard to help each other, help you.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think the benefit of the PPD is that it does provide clarity with regard to the roles that you mentioned and how communications would be coordinated. But it also provides for, I think, a sense of urgency and the level at which a significant cyber incident would be addressed. Because, as the PPD notes, the majority of the incidents that occur, can be handled through, existing relationships and procedures and policies. And it's not like the PPD introduces something radically different. What it does is focus attention and focus level of effort, because when it comes down to it, when I talk about triaging the threats we receive, we could each be spending all of our energies on completely different things from day to day, different threats that all merit attention. But there are times when, because of the significance of a threat or incident, we need to come together with focused effort and attention at a sufficiently senior level with the requisite resources devoted for a given point in time to really ensure we're addressing that threat at the level it needs to be. And I think that's the benefit of this PPD, is creating the mechanism and the expectation for how that focused effort would occur.
For the interest, taking a few questions from the audience. We're going to open questions now, and I ask that you ask specifically to the panelists so we can get a couple of them in. So we'll start in the back there. There's a microphone, I believe, or not?
Yes, hi, Sean Waterman, reporter with Scoop News Group. Thanks very much to the panel for doing this. So I have actually a couple of different questions. Mr. Schaefer, I wondered if you would like to comment on the abolition of or the merging of your old shop at NSA. They got rid of the Information Assurance Directorate. They merged it with Signals Intelligence into this new big Operations Directorate. There was some concern that...
Can I stop you there? We really want to focus on PPD 41. So PPD 41. He's representing the private sector. He's no longer. So we'll go to PPD 41.
Okay. Have we got it right? Then is PPD 41 right? Because Curtis Jukes, the Deputy Director of the NSA, said a couple of days ago that he believed that actually it wasn't right, that NSA needed he implied more authorities. He said by the time you do the paperwork to get the NSA in there supporting DHS, it could be hours or days, and the adversaries already achieved their objective. So have we got the process right? Is there enough opportunity for the NSA, who do have some of the greatest capabilities in this area, to be a part of the response when there's an incident?
Dick, I'll let you answer that one. You're the closest one to the NSA from previous experience.
So I think I think there was a period in history, recent history, when the issue was who's in charge. I think today where we are is one of how do we work together and what position do we play in the game from whatever agency, department we come from. So are there refinements to PPD 41? I think, you know, Phyllis said, yeah, it's a good start. Maybe there's some things yet to happen. So I think, you know, we'll see some future presidential position paper in the future, or some other mechanism to codify refinements to that. But it's the people who are implementing that directive that to me are the ones that are really driving the operation on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't take days or weeks or even hours to bring a response to an event. It's as quick as picking up the phone, making a call, and people, because of the relationship that's been developed, people responding. There are formalisms. You know, my time is dated now 6 years ago, but we knew what the legal frameworks were. We knew what the guidance was. We knew how to ask the questions so that we could all work together in a consistent and supportive way. And I think the situation is just even better today. So I'm not as maybe concerned as Rick Ledgett might be in terms of trying to say PPD 41 needs to go further. I think it will in the future, and it'll be driven by the actions of the people who are actually implementing the directive today.
Phyllis, do you have anything to add?
Just that very quickly, agreed, and I think the fair point that's raised is a couple of years ago, in the time it may have taken to put teams together, that problem is independent, I think, of a policy document. That's something that we're working on right now, to spin those teams up in minutes. I have a mantra for my team called months to milliseconds. Everything needs to go faster, the machines need to go milliseconds, and we need to go minutes. And so we work directly with DoD, with Cyber Command, with law enforcement, with FBI to spin those teams up as needed much more quickly, and we don't need a policy document to do that.
See, next question. Let's go right there.
Thanks. Sean Carberry with Federal Computer Week. You mentioned briefly the NSERP a couple of times, and I'd like to hear a little bit more comment on response to that. Does it flesh out enough? Does it fill in some of the gaps or questions of PPD 41? Does it go too far? And especially with fleshing out the role of the private sector, is private sector buying into that role? How is that being viewed?
So it's out for draft now for comment, so we would probably know more back when we get much more of the input back. I will say the private sector was involved from the very beginning with the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. Every sector had their representative embedded to put input to that, and by the process, they're coming together to say how they want it to happen. It's out for draft, and we'll work with them in that process.
That's one thing that I work in this field here, is you find that the private sector is involved in a lot of the processes that you just see the policy come out. But boy, there's a whole lot of discussion and disagreement that happened before PPD 41 ever was published. So the input is part of the process itself. I think we have maybe a couple more questions. Here to your left. Am I right? And if you're a member of the media, Sean, thank you. Please identify yourself as such.
Great, thank you. Thank you all very much. I've heard several of you before, and I really appreciate it. I'm Bill Jacobs from Assured Enterprises. I came out of JSOC in the Pentagon, and actually in industry ran the Intel Community's 356 programs for a few years. It was really fun. More and more narrowly focused on cyber now. And I just wrote a policy for our firm, so PPD 41 is a great document. I just skimmed run it again. But I cross-referenced from NIST to U.S. law and White House policy and so on and so forth. And there's enough information that is not redundant, but repeated and complementary. That's good. But PPD, in the end, is reactive. And to Richard's earlier point, you mentioned a company which I won't repeat, but NASA is clearly an incident among many recently, and more every day, every week, that because they were reactive and don't understand ones and zeros behind compacted dynamic digital libraries, frankly, that they have a wide gap, and they're not the only agency. And we're going to see for a fourth time another agency, big one, and they're using exactly the same suite of tools, and no more, but exactly what NASA used under the very same circumstances, which continue. So there are a lot of gaps, and I hope to come up to see Colonel Vega and prove. We've got 57 patents, but anyway, but prove where the problem after next really is, and the extant problems that still exist despite everything that's been published with their principal firm that supported them and at NASA. And one last thing, the culture. We see up-and-comers that are PM.
General, I'm going to prompt you for a question because we got about 50 seconds left. And
okay, real quick. Well, I guess that was a statement before, more or less. But we see PMs, and I know you all see them, up-and-comers of any, they call them CISO with a risk officer or whatever, and if they're upwardly mobile, they don't want to know. I've seen that a lot. I was wondering if you see that in some of the folks you deal with. They don't want to know because they're at risk with their position, not just at risk with.
well, let me, if you don't mind, I'm going to take that question for the sake of time here. That's a culture within the organizations, and one of the things that we're measuring now when we look at some of the organizations on whether they have their own separate security officer now versus their own, the CIO and the security officer falls under them, and how the security officer is now in the boardroom in the organizations that are taking this seriously. So I believe you are seeing the change on the level of attention that this is receiving. But for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there. I want to thank our panelists here, and one thing I want you to notice is I requested panelists from these different agencies, and one thing that we get criticized in the community is that we don't have the representation from the different diversity groups within that can be, who are the experts. These are the experts, and we only have one older gentleman on the panel.
I was going to say, I feel like the one lucky guy on Fox News.
But the idea is that you young ladies here, these are not just heroes for you, they're heroes for me. So thank you for coming, and you too, Dick.
Thank you.